to the table. My name is Barbie Winterbottom. I am the CEO and founder of the Business of HR and the host of The Table. I am thrilled to have all of you here claiming your seats at the table with me and for our very special guest who is joining us today. It is the launch of our Honoring Black History Month, and we are thrilled, just so excited to bring you our guest. Let me do a little bit of an introduction for you so that you know who our guest is and why we thought he would be the perfect guest to kick off our celebration of Black History Month. Ernest Crim is currently a history teacher, and he is the father of three amazing daughters and a husband to an amazing wife. You may have heard his name, but maybe you don't remember why you've heard it. Ernest was the victim of a hate crime in 2016. And thankfully, he had his phone with him so that he could record exactly what was happening. And he was able to share his video and his story and his experience with all of us. And we're going to show you a clip of that video a little bit later on in the show. Right now, I want to share with you that Ernest is a Black history advocate. And I absolutely love that is what is fueling his passion. And in his own words, it's what has saved him. And hoping that all of you and everyone else who you may share this with will also learn to appreciate, respect, and honor the history that has brought us all here together today. So with that, I am going to invite Ernest to join us. So welcome.
Hey.
Welcome. I have been looking forward to this for such a long time, and I'm a big fan of you and the work you do. And I first want to thank you for being a teacher, because we all know teachers do not get enough credit for everything you do, because you're not just teaching, you're also counseling, you're coaching, you're mentoring, you're nurturing the souls of these children, and they need it. And we need more people like you. So thank you for that. I want to show a clip of your experience and give the audience that context of what it feels like. I've watched it, and as soon as I saw it, I literally leaned back in my seat, because I thought, what the heck is happening and why? And this woman was just so hateful. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It was a hate crime. It just fueled by, well, ignorance and hate from my perspective, but that's me. So let's show that, and then let's get into everything that's happened, since then, and what led you up to that moment.
Say it again. She knocked my phone. So if I hit her, what happens to me? What happens to me? What happens to me? She knocked my phone out my hand. She calling me a nigga. Y'all gonna let this happen? What type of people are y'all? You don't know me, man.
We don't bother. You're acting like a nigga, bro.
You act. Keep saying it. And what did you call my wife? Give me your name too. Give me your name. Give me.
Over me and call me a nigga.
Check it out.
All right, now we're back. So Ernest, how does it feel when you watch that video again?
It takes me back to that moment. I typically don't, of course I don't watch it for fun, but I typically don't see it unless I'm speaking, and I'll show it to the audience, and it always catches them off guard, and rightfully so. But I think I have a different epiphany every time, because with this speaking journey I'm on, I'm maturing through it, I'm healing through it, and as you heal, you view things differently. And I think this particular time when I saw it, I just I paid close attention to the tone of my voice and how angry I was, rightfully so, and just like the background noise really stood out to me this time for something. Maybe it's because of the headphones. I could just hear the sounds, and it to me it's like it's a metaphor, just the racism being drowned out by other sounds, and the fact that people couldn't really tell what was going on and feeling defenseless in a sense, and seeing people who looked like me who didn't help me, and it makes you feel helpless. But looking at the journey I'm on now, and just seeing how I've been blessed with opportunities to use it to help people, it just makes me very fortunate to be in this position.
Yeah. I mean, as I was watching it, I felt helpless for you. And I also noticed there were other Black folks in the area who weren't taking action. And I wonder, is it because they felt if they did, they would be vilified for it versus heroic, right?
Mm,
And in a split second, that can happen, and especially because of the color of your skin, which is wrong. There's no justification for it, but that's the reality that you live
yeah,
with every day, right? And other
yeah,
people with dark skin and of different races and ethnicities live with every day. And I recognize that as a privilege that I have, right? If I was in that scenario and I stepped in and confronted her, I would be met with a very different reaction
yeah,
than if you stepped in or a person of color stepped in, right? And so
yeah,
I do recognize that, but that must have been so confusing in that moment. And I'm
yeah,
really grateful that you have the video, because you have the evidence to show what happened, not only for yourself, but so that other people can almost be immersed in that moment and feel what that feels like. She kept shouting, a word that I literally can't say it, but the N word, right? We all know the word. And she kept shouting it over and over and over again. And I was like, wow, she really felt powerful by using that phrase and that word. And to me, I'm interpreting that, and I'm looking at to me, I'm looking at ignorance. That is what I
yeah.
saw her displaying in that moment. Was, could she not find another way to express what she was trying to say, or did she just weaponize that to a point of just hate, which is the only way I can imagine that word is used these days, um, or ever. I guess I should qualify that, or ever.
Hmm.
But how I hear it and I know what I feel, but I'm not a Black person or anyone. Clearly you can look at me and I do not have dark skin at all. I say all the time, like I am the whitest white girl you'll ever. I've done the DNA ancestry, and it's like 99.9999%
99.99.
Northern European, right? There's no variable in my ethnicity. So I can only interpret it through my lived experience. But how does it feel to you? And the reason I'm asking this is because I want the rest of the people watching this to understand how that must feel when you're on the receiving end of such a hate-filled, charged word.
Yeah, so in my book I talk about this. That's the first time and the only time that's ever happened to my face. Now I had a situation where I was in college with some friends, and someone drove past and said it, which, what are you gonna do? You're not about to chase them down.
Right.
So that situation, especially being an adult who was, teaching for about 6 years at that point, a person who was already aware of Black history and everything, I saw videos like that before, and I think that's kind of what went through my mind when I took out my phone. But it freezes you. It's when you're in a traumatic situation, it's fight, it's flight, it's freeze, and it was definitely a freezing moment. Like I can't believe she's saying this, and I think the best way to describe this is it almost feels like you're stuck, because when that person says it, especially in this day and age, or just any generation, when you say it, I think they say it because they know they have a certain, like you said, a level of privilege and power, and the feeling is I'll get away with this, and it's a subtle thing because we know there's a power dynamic in this country. Unfortunately, there's not equity fully.
Mhm.
So it's almost like, ha ha, look what I can do, and I can get away with it, because before she was doing that, or even in the midst of it, she was calling over an officer. And I think that's the only reason why she got kicked out. I'm not sure if the officer heard the word or maybe the spit, but they did kick her out. And that began my pursuit, of course, of justice. But I froze, and it was like I felt helpless, because if I do something, what's going to happen? If my wife does something, what's going to happen?
Right.
And I think, like you said, I expected more from the people who were there who look like me. And also, to her white friend in the back, I would expect other people in general to step up. So it just feels like you're stuck, defenseless, and there's rage inside, but you don't feel like you should respond the way your emotions are telling you. And that's a paralyzing and traumatic feeling.
That's got to be so difficult. And then after the moment, right? Maybe you're on your way home with your wife, and you're likely reliving it because, like, what the heck just happened?
Yeah.
And I'm sure it sucked the joy out of whatever that experience was, right? It looked like you were at a festival or something really
Mm-hmm.
fun that should have been really fun. So now fast forward, you go through all of this and you have this experience, and yes, you received quite a bit of coverage on the news and in the press and the media. And it sounds like, thankfully, people took it seriously, and there was, proceedings and things like that happened. And I also saw a clip where she half-heartedly apologized in some weird way by saying that to her that word doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything other than ignorant. Like, to her, she says that word to anybody who she feels is being ignorant in the moment, regardless of your color.
Right.
And I feel like that's kind of a lame way. I didn't hear any
Fair.
apology at all, um, frankly. But that kind of adds insult to injury, right? When you're on the receiving end of that. So I can
Yeah.
only imagine that you've had to relive this over and over again. And then if we rewind 400 years, when we think about Black history, which you have a level of expertise in this as a teacher, so I'm excited to learn some of this from you. But the feeling you had in that moment is the same, I would imagine, the same feeling that your ancestors and the ancestors of other folks with dark skin who were brought here against their own will in chains on ships and boats and whatever modes of transportation they had, have felt for generation after generation after generation. The rage,
Yeah.
at the same time, coupled with the fear and the paralyzing reality that if you do anything, it's only going to get worse for you.
Yeah. Yeah.
That is something that I have never experienced, right? If somebody does something wrong to me, or verbally or physically assaults me, I know that I can take action against that person, and likely no additional harm is going to come from me to me because of the way I look.
Mm-hmm.
And unfortunately, your families and your history hasn't proven out to be the same for you. So
Yeah.
how explain to us how Black history has saved you and how you've made those connections to bring you where you are today.
Yeah. So for me, like you said, when we left and you're just going through the motions of everything, my mind was, because I grew up and I was a fighter. And I don't mean that in the sense of I pushed through. Like, now I'm a fighter in life. Literally, I push through things and I motivate people. But I literally fought all the time growing up until I was about 10 or so. And that was just like the way I expressed my frustration with things. As I matured and got older, that wasn't the best way to express my anger. So
Probably not.
I've mellowed out a lot, and that was the first time I was faced with the conflict of that magnitude, in which it was like you feel the only way you should react is to fight, because you need to protect yourself and your wife. And in that situation, it took me back. Like, what am I doing? What am I supposed to do? And for me, the way I fought was, of course, by speaking about it, by educating people, by going through the justice system, and for whatever it's worth. And that for me was even like a lose situation, kind of, because I'm like, well, look, if we respond with violence, we're gonna lose. Like, the cop gonna come over. Who knows what's gonna happen?
Yep.
Also, if we fight this situation, we could potentially lose. So, but on the other side, I have something to live for. I have my kids, I have my wife, I have a community behind me, my family, and everything. So I say Black history saved my life because it gave me the vantage point. It gave me the knowledge to know that it didn't happen to me because of me per se. Now, of course, we know with history, we say, oh, because they were Black. Like, no, I don't take it that way. I take it as if somebody treats you a certain way, it's a reflection of how they feel about themselves. So it doesn't have to just be a race thing. If somebody is bullying you, and racism is a form of systemic bullying. So if somebody bullying a child in school, you've seen it on movies before. It gets to a point where they break down and they're like, well, yeah, I dealt with this, or something gets to them. It's the same thing. I didn't do anything to this person. Now, the difference in this situation with bullying is she felt comfortable because, again, she has a system that she feels like would protect her with doing that.
Yeah.
And again, so Black History saved me because it said, "Will this happen to you?" And you come from people who have always fought and persevered and created amazing things, so you don't accept that. Now, whether I pursued it through the justice system or not, I was going to push forward and fight because I knew one day, especially with me recording it and posting it, which takes another level of bravery. And I've spoken to people who've dealt with stuff like this, and a lot of people don't want it out there. They might go through it and they might just move on. For me, it was, as a historian, I look again 400, 500, 600 years in the past, and I look that far in the future. So I had kids who were 3 and 1 at the time, and my mindset was, one day they'll know about this, or one day, even if I didn't post it, I'll have to share this with them. And I need them to know that their father carried himself the appropriate way moving forward, and he stood up for them in the future and for their mom right there. So it gave me that perspective, and that's what history does. It's the same thing when I had a student who recently told me that she went to Mexico over Christmas break, and that's where her folks are from and everything. And she found out that I think it was her grandfather was like a mayor of a town or something like that. And she was glowing when she found that out. And then she went on the Wikipedia page of the town and showed me his name and everything, and the time in which he presided over. And I said, how did that make you feel? And I already knew what the answer was. She had pride. It made her feel like, I can do this too. And I started messing with, like, yo, well, you might want to do that here. You want to be the mayor, you want to be the president. So that's what history does for me. When that happened, I'm able to say, it's not me. It's a reflection of you. And since this does not reflect me, I'm going to change this narrative so people understand how you use this and how our history can bolster us. Because if you don't know who you are, anybody can name you. And if anybody can name you, you'll answer to anything. And that's an African proverb I start my book with. So that's the foundation that will propel us moving forward. And as a Black person who comes from a history of oppression in this country, it's vitally important that you know who you are, because just like you saw in the video, we could be labeled with the N-word, we could be labeled as criminal, thug, etc. But my history counters that and says, no, that's a lie, that's propaganda. This is what I actually am.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. And I think naming yourself, like claiming who you are and owning that, and having a sense of pride in that, regardless of the color of your skin, your ethnicity, or your background, is so powerful, right? And that sense of pride is real. And I have a lot of that kind of connection with my name, my family's name, and what it means in Old English, and how the families have evolved over time. So I absolutely can connect with that sense of knowing who you are. And when my wife and I got married, there was the question of, well, are you going to take each other's names? And I'm like, I'm not changing my name. This is my name. Keep my name. So if you want my name, that's great, but I'm keeping my name because it's so much a part of how I identify. So I completely understand what you're saying, and I hope that everyone can and feel that sense of pride in who they are and where they come from. But something else you said really jumped out at me when we think about this woman's actions, that she felt empowered to behave that way and to lash out and attack you because the systems in place have been created specifically to protect people like her and vilify people like you.
Right.
And that's what I think people don't understand. And there's all this controversy around, privilege, and, well, I'm not privileged. I wasn't born with money. I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. And I've explained it to other people in my community who I interact with who are white, to say privilege doesn't mean wealth. It can manifest itself in that way, right? When you roll back and Black families were not given mortgages and they weren't allowed to buy homes in certain areas. And like you can roll back history and look at how privilege does equal wealth, generational wealth. But in the overall greater context, it's not just about wealth. It's about being able to walk down the street and not fear that you'll be arrested or shot because you're in what's perceived as a white neighborhood or where you don't belong. And I've experienced this when and I shared this with you earlier. I had a foster son for a couple years, very, very tall, over 6 foot tall, very dark skinned, from Jamaica, Black young man. And I had to walk him to school and back because he kept getting pulled over by the police and they would question him as to what he was doing in this neighborhood. They made him open his backpack and there was nothing but books in there and pencils. But, this kept happening over and over again. So as soon as I walked with him, they left him alone. One time, however, they still pulled him over because they were worried about me. And, is this young man harassing you? And I was like, no, he's my son. We're good. But I've experienced it from that secondary level.
Yeah.
But it still can't feel the same for me as it felt for him or for you. And so I think these types of conversations are so powerful and so helpful to allow people to understand what we mean when we say privilege. And you may have certain types of privileges. You are educated, you have a job, you have a family. Along with that comes certain privileges that other people who don't have an education, don't have the ability to attain employment, those types of things, they don't have those certain privileges. So everybody has it, but just own what you do have and then advocate for others who don't, right? That's kind of the overall message that we want people to understand and to not like die on that sword of, well, I wasn't born with a spoon in my mouth, because that argument just go away, just stop. We don't do that. Just stop it.
And I think a lot of people are missing the point of, when you say white privilege, we're just talking about race, That's like you said, it's not to say that, because white people live in poverty as well. I've seen that before, so it's not like, we're talking about race, but people, like you said, people can have privileges in other aspects of society and things of that nature. So I think that's just, how people how it's been framed and also how people perceive it.
Yeah, and to get so defensive about it. That's the one thing that I find amazing. About 2 years ago when that term really started to gain some traction. I grew up in a fairly small town here in the South. And so I've connected with different people on Facebook who I went to high school with and grew up with. And I posted something about privilege and what it means. And oh my gosh, these posts, they attacked me left and right about it doesn't exist and you're crazy. Why are you ashamed of being white? And I'm like, I'm not ashamed of being white. I can be white and be proud of who I am and my ancestors and my history, and also understand that privilege exists and advocate and do what I can to help others in whatever mediums are available to me. So it's not none of it is black and white, right? There's all this gray area that we have to elevate the way we think and the way we interact to be able to understand it. And unfortunately, like you said, systems have been created and in place that allows people who look like me to not have to do that, right? We don't have to accept that we have privilege because it exists whether we accept it or not.
Right.
So we can just benefit from it and go along our merry way and, to hell with the rest of everything else. And I feel so strongly that we have to help people understand why that's so dangerous. And you lived that. And fortunately, your experience didn't end with violence and you weren't harmed. Your wife could have been, right? She spat and it landed on your wife. And thankfully, there was nothing that came of that, but it could have.
Yeah.
And so, it's just, there's so much gray to all of this. And yet some of it is so basic that it shouldn't be hard.
Yeah.
And yet it is, right? It is for some people. So I have some questions for you. So I would love for you to share with everyone when you spent 2 days with PBS
Mhm.
as part of a research group. Kind of tell us that story and what you took away from that, and what you learned and what you now can share with all of us.
Yeah, that was a life-changing experience. So this happened, trying my best to remember, like after 2020, everything just seems to merge together. But I'm
Oh,
not,
it's all over, friends.
yeah, I think it was like 2018 going into 2019, I believe. And I actually had my college roommate. He sent me this link and he was like, "Yo, man, I think you should fill this out because I don't really frequent these casting call things or whatever." So he sent it to me. I shared my story, typed it out, whatever. And the producers hit us up and they were interested. And they said, "This is what's going to happen if you choose to accept it. We're going to have you in Chicago for a weekend in the Hyde Park neighborhood. We're going to record some conversations, political, and it's going to be like, half liberal, half conservative based on how they voted in the last election or whatever. And we just want to kind of, bridge the gap." And it was called, Divided We Fall. And I went in there not really knowing what was going to happen because at the time we didn't know it was going to be on PBS or anything. We just kind of knew we were going to record something. And it was life changing because I don't think Americans realize how polarized we are and how much we all live in bubbles.
Mm.
And although we are all exposed to the media, we're exposed to different. I can type in anything on Google and go there, Google Maps, whatever, right? But do I have a relationship with somebody in that location so I can truly understand what it's like? So when you see things through the media, you form stereotypes. And let's take out what that word actually means. It just means that we're creating a generalization of something. A stereotype could be that Florida is like this, or Georgia is like this, or New York is like this, or Boston is like this, Chicago is like this, based on what we see on movies, TV shows, whatever.
Right.
So I had never in my life sat down and talked to somebody heart to heart who voted opposite of me. Now, I'm sure I work with people that voted opposite. I know I have. I know I do. I'm sure I've conversed with people, whatever. But the nature of America is we don't talk about these things in public. What do they say? Don't talk about politics and religion in public. But they run the world.
Right.
Like,
And money. Three
it's
things, right? Money's the third. But yeah.
exactly, and churches are everywhere, and politics, like it's everywhere. But we're not supposed to talk about it. It's the weirdest thing. We walk past each other, and it's like, "Hey, how you doing today?" "I'm doing great," and you're probably not. So we create this veil in America that we like act like everything's great, but then we go home and we plug in, we look at these things, and we all see how messed up the world is going, and then we go to our silos and our bubbles and talk about how bad the other side is without actually knowing that person and what they think. So when I went there that weekend, that was my mindset. And I'm like, well, what are we gonna do? So we had a circle. We introduced ourselves. We talked about times we were proud to be American, times we weren't proud to be American, and it caught me off guard because like I couldn't fathom some of the things that were said actually being true to some people. Like it was one situation where they said, "When were you most proud?" And the producer put us next to each other on purpose, so I knew it. I said I was most proud when Obama got elected. And I said, in hindsight, of course, I have some critiques for him, but I was so proud. I was in college and it's my last year, my first time voting for president. And to just, and the things he talked about, I related to. And it wasn't just what he looked like, but it was what he looked like. And his policies were so enticing to me. The very next person said that she was least proud to be an American when Obama got elected.
I
And it
can see
was,
that. Yeah.
yeah, and it was like my world. It was a white lady, and she said it with passion, and she said it was because people just voted for him because of his skin color. And I was just like, what are you talking about? So I immediately, when they gave us time to like talk out about like things he wanted to respond to, I was like, oh, excuse me. And if anybody Googles this, you'll see the episode. I was like, wait, hold on. Now, of course, the skin color played a role, but people voted for him not just because of that, and because of who he seemed to be like as a person. And
Yeah.
we just kind of went back and forth for a little bit. But what it let me know was that like these things can become sparring matches online where you're losing sleep and energy, And it's not to say like we didn't really come to a happy medium. Like it was, throughout the weekend we say hi to each other and everything, but it was still kind of like for me, like, but for like it helped to be able to verbalize that frustration with somebody. I don't look to agree with everybody, but I do look to have the freedom to express how I feel about something. And that weekend allowed me to do that. There were some people who I was on the liberal side. There were some folks on the other side who were black and conservative, and having to hear their perspective. There was one particular person who was black and similar to me, was very outspoken about being proud that she was black, but then she was also conservative. And it just and I say conservative in the sense that who she voted for, and it caught me off guard. But having the conversation with her opened my mind to that's a different way to look at things that I never considered.
Right.
Now on the flip side, if I saw that person post about that on Facebook, then I might be like, oh, what are you? Who are you? Like I learned through that process to one that if I disagree with somebody online or vehemently or just on TV, if I can't have a conversation with that person, it's not worth arguing with them online.
Right.
And I learned that they would prefer to keep us divided. Again, that's not to say that we all gonna hold hands and agree on everything, but that's to say that through conversation we can find commonalities, because we had to find a commonality with some people and we did. But we also found that the anger gets pulled out and we could just sit down and say, why do you feel that way? Okay, I see that. And I think more Americans need to do that, honestly.
I agree. And you know what's interesting about her argument, when you think about it, is she was angry or disappointed because so many people, from her perspective, voted for him simply because of the color of his skin.
Right.
Conversely, how many millions of people didn't vote for him simply because of the color of his skin?
Exactly. I wish I would have said that.
Both ways. And what that tells me is, the question I would ask her is specifically what policies or what about him as a leader don't you like or don't you align with?
Right.
Because I would want to know, did she bother to learn any of that? Or was her bias and her prejudice, it's really her prejudice, not her bias, but was her prejudice based on the color of his skin only? Or did she really not agree with his politics, which is fine. Right. You don't have to.
Exactly.
We all have a right to believe what we believe, and that's okay, as long as you're not harming other people.
Right.
But her argument just doesn't hold water for me. And as someone who, I was also thrilled in that moment, because I felt like we really did something as a country that was profound in that moment. And we've had some struggles since then for sure. But it's amazing to me that that's the argument that she made, was that she was disappointed because he was voted for because of the color.
Right.
When since the dawn of time, how many things have not happened to people with dark skin simply because of the color of their skin? So it just
exactly.
Anyway.
And I think too, like, I'm not. She'll probably never admit it, but I think just hearing my perspective probably was able to just kind of change how she views some things. And again, for me as well, having conversations with her and other people just made me understand that we have to, like, I think the only way to heal this nation is through things like that. But the trick is we're kept so busy all the time that the only time we get to truly see how other people think and feel is when we're done working and we go to social media and the television, and they're going to tell us what they want us to know to continue to divide us, in my opinion.
That is really true, and certainly amplified through the pandemic, when we're not out there meeting with people face to face. All of the community type events, have been on lockdown for the past 2 years now. So I think it's even amplified even more because our only means of connection has been through social media or watching things on TV. And so we are so heavily influenced by what's being served up to us in whatever, medium
exactly
actually, is there. But one of the things you said was really interesting, because what I took away from your experience is that it's really that connection point that makes the difference, and having the courage and the vulnerability to have difficult conversations and to put yourself out there to say, like, tell me more about why you think that, or help me with this. And so I have a question for you. As
Mm-hmm.
a white person in this world, um, I get confused sometimes because
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the advocate. I want to be walking side by side with folks of all colors and skin colors and ethnicities and religions and backgrounds, because I care about people and I want everyone's voices to be heard and everyone to feel valued and have equity and equality. But there's mixed messages out there sometimes, and so it can be really hard. So I am very excited about amplifying Black voices during Black History Month, and whether they're professionals or considered non-professionals, whatever the walk of life and their career is almost irrelevant to me, because I am just so passionate about using whatever platform I have to amplifying the voices that are out there. And then I saw a post on social media just today, as a matter of fact, by a Black woman who works in the D&I space. And she was really angry because a venture capital group funded a DE&I consultancy led by white people. And I understand. I understand that there's absolute disparity there between who gets funding for business and who doesn't, and a lot of it is based on the perception of who is qualified for that funding. Whether that's right or not, we all know it's not right. But the argument is that white people have no place in the DEI space. And if you're a white person and you are um, exploiting Black people during Black History Month for your own vanity metrics or for your own platform, that's the wrong thing to do. And so then I'm like, well, am I doing this wrong? Like, is this not the right thing to do? Because I was going into this with what I think is the right mentality and the right perspective. But then it gave me pause to stop and say, maybe I shouldn't do this. Maybe this isn't the right thing to do. So I'd love your take and insight, because I absolutely don't want to do the wrong thing. I want to be the support and the advocate that I can be.
Yeah, I think that, not knowing the full context of where she was coming from, I can just say she probably is frustrated too. She's probably seen a lot of companies who, decide to only focus on Black issues during February, or only, seek Black people during February, and so on and so forth. And, from my relatable experience, I would say that if people like yourself, if you're committed, if you've been doing this throughout the year, if you have been committed to this in general, then Black History Month is just a great time to elevate that even more, because the world is watching. They have a Black History Month in the UK in October. Theirs was inspired by ours. They're watching too. The world is watching. We're, wealthiest, nation in the world. Everybody's looking at us for things. So I think that it's just a great time to bring it back together. Carter G. Woodson, who founded Black History Week, which turned to Black History Month, did it not to just focus on it then, but he wanted to use it to say, let's discuss everything we've been doing throughout the year. Let's come together to discuss these. And of course, there's also frustration. I could definitely understand that when there's a DEI, company that's being led by all white folks. And I think that in that particular space, I think there's value in having a white person within it, but I think that it has to be a tandem, because, I cannot as a male educate people on, sexual harassment, sexual assault from a female perspective, but I could say that if I'm going through the process of unlearning, I think it would be of value, but not by myself. I think I would have to be with somebody who's I probably learned with, worked with, or whatever, for whatever reason. So I've actually sat through a training. One of the best trainings was a Black woman and a white man, and the way they did it together, I don't think they could have done it separately. They did it together because it was mixed company. It was Black folks and white folks, Hispanic folks, Asians there, and they were able to sometimes split us up and have these conversations. But if I'm going to a training and it's about myself and it's led by only white people, I'm gonna look at it a little weird, because what can you what can you yeah, like, what can you tell me about this experience? Now, I understand that you'll probably get more access, but then use that to elevate the people that who have lived through it, who have also done that work. So it gets iffy sometimes, but I think that with this type of space, like again for myself, the only thing I can compare it to is like a woman who might be a feminist or working, fighting against sexism. I have to defer. I can read as much as I want, but I can never fully relate. And I think my role is best served speaking to other men and speaking up when those things come up in conversation and advocating on that perspective. Because on the other side, if I was to speak to a woman about this issue, I'm gonna need some help.
No, I love that. I think that makes so much sense. As a matter of fact, I saw a gentleman post something last week. I think it was on LinkedIn. He had just finished reading Glennon Doyle's book Untamed, and he was thanking her because it gave him insight into perspective, insight and insights into the perspective of what women go through. And he has daughters. And he's like, I have to now call my college age daughter and apologize to her for all the things that I either did or didn't do as an adult man in her life because I didn't understand her lived experience and her lived reality. So I love that, right? That you acknowledge, like, I'm not the person to go and talk to women about what it's like to be women. What I would love to see is where we come together. So white people can work in the D&I space, Black people can work in the D&I space, men, women, cis male, trans male, everybody can work together as long as we collectively understand that diversity isn't defined by one single characteristic. And one of my dearest friends and fellow HR consultant, she's also an attorney, and a huge voice in the HR and D&I space. Her name is Natasha Bowman. Hello, Natasha. Hopefully you're watching. I love Natasha, and she and I have been doing some work together. And during a call, we were just listing all the differences about who we are. And so, we're both women, we're both over 40. I'm overweight. She says she's overweight. I think she looks phenomenal. She's Black. I'm white. I'm gay. She's straight. I have ADD. She has bipolar disorder. And we were talking about how all of these things that make us who we are they're dimensions of who we are, but not any one of those things defines who we are. But it's all just variables and different elements. And so anybody, if you were to, you could probably list 5 things that are unique to you that not everybody else shares. So if we can come together and all recognize that everyone has elements of them that are different from other people, that's really the core of DE&I, is to understand that our differences make us special. I interviewed Ashley Brundage at the table, and Ashley is a trans woman who has created an amazing career, and her book is called Empowering Differences. And instead of trying to hide that she's a trans woman, when she would go into job interviews, she flipped the script and she would lead with that and say, and as a result of that experience, I am the best person to lead your diversity initiatives. I am the best person because this is what my lived experience has informed for me and what I share with the rest of the people of the organization. So I think if we can all recognize that there is no cookie cutter, one size fits all, that we can work in this space together collaboratively and honor all the things that make us different. And then to your point about your experience with the group for PBS, also acknowledge and honor the things that connect us.
Definitely. And that's actually another aspect of the show. And I forgot to mention, but towards the end, the last thing we did was they paired us up with someone on the other side of the aisle, and we had to, find a common ground. And one of the things that we discussed, the person I spoke to, talked about just being a parent. And I mean, it just made you put in perspective, like, the political differences are, it's one aspect of who we are, of course. And of course, assuming that this person's political difference does not equate to the dehumanization of who I am. But that's just literally one aspect of who we are. And it's the same way how you can be friends with somebody at work, maybe, or friends in general with somebody, and not know where they stand politically, because maybe all your conversation is about sports. It could be about basketball, football. It could be about music, and then you may find later and you might, oh my God, I never knew. Well, it's because you were focused on a different part of yourself, and that's fine. And I think
Mhm.
that hopefully, through this pandemic, we can find a way to get back to that, because I think that's what we're sorely missing.
I agree. I think recognizing what connects us, I think it also softens us to being so quick to judge on the things that are different.
Hmm.
Right?
Hmm.
You already have that connection. You already either love or respect or have some relationship with that person. So then when you do find that they're, maybe ultra conservative from a political perspective,
Yeah.
you're not as apt to immediately just dismiss them because you see
Yeah.
them as a human. And
Right.
now there's an emotion and there's a connection there, which then opens you up to perhaps talk about it in a different way
Yeah.
versus shut it down, which unfortunately social media allows us to do, and then engage
Yeah.
in the negative talk constantly.
When you have a friend, um, of let's say a marginalized group, a personal relationship, and the media or somebody else tries to tell you something about that group, you in your mind you counter it every time, because you're like, no, that's not true, because for example. So yeah,
Yeah,
it's
that makes a
accurate.
lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. So after this experience and through everything else that you lived through as a black man in this world and as a history teacher, and a teacher in general, regardless of what you teach, you have written a book
Mhm.
about your experience, and I'm going to share that image with everyone here. So, Black History Saved My Life. I love the title of the book. Great image of you, and tell us what inspired you to write the book, and what do you want people to know about this book? And then I'll show your website as well, so that people can order the book
Yeah.
and read it for themselves.
Yeah. So Black History Saved My Life is and I'm glad that people like the title, because it was a last second change, honestly. But it came to be because when I dealt with this experience, my wife and we had to go back to work, 2 weeks later. This happened July 30th, and I teach in a town that's outside of Chicago, and we start mid-August. So we're talking less than 2 weeks later, possibly, we had to go to work, and we had to go to meetings. And the nature of education, black males are less than 2% of teachers. And my district is very similar to that demographic. So I felt isolated. I felt like I shouldn't be there. My mind was other places. I spent like a week trying to call lawyers and never had to do that. And talking to the media, and also having to think about lesson planning. So
Wow.
mentally, I wasn't in a good space. And teaching if I was a person who had no life stress, teaching would create it. So that's it's a, if I had the perfect life, teaching would derail that. So that it's already a stressful field as it is. When I went back to work, the only benefit was I teach the content in which I can talk about these issues. But again, going through life, dealing with the stress of working, I had some times where I break down. I never had that happen before. And I'm a pretty expressive guy, as you all can tell, and I'm not bashful about sharing my emotions for the most part. But it got to a point where it was just too much for me. I had a day, so it happened, of course, July 30th. But by 2017, I was having some time where I would just think about it too much, and I started speaking about it. And sometimes you kind of get lost in your thoughts. By March, um, I I was driving to work one day, and all of a sudden I just, like, I'm 5 minutes away going down the street, and I just recall, like, just breaking down crying. And I'm not sure what I was listening to. I might have just had the music off, but like I had to pull over. And I pull over into this lot, and I'm just like, I can't do this. I cannot go into work. I was kind of beside myself a little bit. I was like, I don't feel like I should be there. I don't feel welcome. I don't want to be in this space right now. And of course, as my mama's boy, youngest kid, I called my mom, and I was like, and she was like, you need to go home. Don't try to force that. So I went there as a teacher just so I could, like, yo, these are my lesson plans. I gotta go. And as I was driving around like I need to find, where do I go for therapy? You know, because all we know in this country is you go to the doctor, you get prescribed something, you see is your blood pressure okay? What's your weight like? Let me check your ear. You know all that.
Mhm.
Even though it was on my insurance, I didn't even know how to access it. I had never seen a therapist. I didn't know what that was. So I remember Googling some, and I called, and they were like, "Yo, oh man, I'm so sorry that happened to you, but I can't help you because you're not on my insurance." And I had HMO. So it's like HMO is very difficult to do anything.
Yeah.
So the only thing I could do when I was at home by myself, and I decided that, I've been, it was 2017. I had been saying that I wanted to write a book since I graduated from college in 2009. And I said, I got to get this out. I got too much frustration. I got too many experiences, and if I keep it bottled in, then it's just going to be the death of me. So what I started to do, and I didn't know how to do this before, but I was like, oh, I got an idea. I'm gonna just start to notate every time I experience racism in my life.
Mhm.
And what happened was, I say Black History saved my life because every time I experience a microaggression or overt racism, my parents or the books or just the inquiry, the confidence, it helped remind me that again, nothing's wrong with you, something happened to you. And when somebody says something or does something to you, it's again a reflection of them, and you can counter it with your history. I came across a study during this time that said, done by the University of Pittsburgh and Harvard, that Black children who are taught to have racial pride perform better academically. And a light bulb went off in my head, and I said, "That's my life," because I went through all of this stuff from the age of 6. Microaggression, being told that Santa Claus ain't black, different stuff like that from white friends, up until that point. And I take readers through a journey of the age of 6 to the age of 28 when that happened, and just everything that molded me to be in that moment. It's
Mhm.
almost like a prequel. Like you
Yeah.
see everything that led up to that, and you're like, oh, that's why he's doing what he's doing now.
Wow.
So I wrote out my outline, and I would just write. I eventually was able to find a therapist. In our first meeting, he was like, "Hey, I want you to get a notebook, and I want you to write your story." I said, "Guess what? I'm already doing it."
I
So
love that.
yeah, and from March 2017, I gave myself a deadline by like uh, December 30th, 2019. I'm sorry, 2018. I finished it, and I changed the title. It was going to be called "For Such a Time as This." I changed the title the following year when I went to a college fair, and I had to come up with a name for my booth. So that's kind of where we are. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, I'll share it again. So it's Black History Saved My Life and your website,
Thank you.
ernestcrim.com, if anybody is looking for you. You said something that really jumped out at me, and there's a book that I love audiobooks. So
Mm,
I'm the nerd who I buy
mm,
the hard copy so I can make all the notes, and then I also buy the audiobook. And I usually listen to the audiobook first and then go to the hard copy. There's a book and it was written by Oprah in partnership with a neuropsychiatrist.
mhm,
And unfortunately, I cannot think of his name right now. But the book is called "What Happened to You," and
mm,
what you said. It's not what's wrong with you, because that's the way we have typically approached it. What's wrong with you?
mhm, mhm,
And what they talk about is how, as children, our neural pathways are developed based on what happens to us.
mm,
And it's not because we're wrong, it's because literally our brains have been programmed to interpret the world in a certain way, or to seek safety, or what have you. So when we think about PTSD and folks who have been in combat and they come home, and there's one example of this one gentleman who he was a combat veteran. I believe it was from Vietnam, and he came home and he was walking out of the movie theater with his girlfriend or wife at the time, holding hands, and a car drove by and backfired,
mm.
and uncontrollably, like, he falls to the ground, covers his head. He was right back in combat. Now that wasn't his fault. he was trained
Yep.
to do that, right? That was his brain stem was doing exactly what it was supposed to do, protect him. And so he had no control over what he did by falling to the ground and screaming whatever
Mm-hmm.
orders he would have screamed had he been in combat at that time. And, physically shaking and all of these things because of what happened to him and how
Yep.
his neural pathways had been structured for safety, because our brains are structured to keep us safe
Yep.
and foremost, right? That's what they're there to do. And so when we look at the way we treat people and the conversations we have, we often say, like, what's wrong with him? What's wrong with her? Instead of reframing that and saying, I wonder what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
What got them where they are, and how can we get them out of it? How can we help to get them out of it?
Yeah.
It creates so much more compassion in our world versus
Yep.
judgment. And I think we could all benefit from
Yeah.
a little bit more of that in every element of our lives, for sure.
Yeah.
Uh,
Definitely.
so, yeah, it's a great book, What Happened to You. And
Oh yeah, I was writing it down as you were saying it.
it's phenomenal. And I love the audiobook because they both kind of, it's conversational. And so it's really great. And then there's a lot
Mm.
of great things in the actual book as well. Um, so you are a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
You are, helping create the minds and grow the minds of our future, which is a wonderful thing. I have so much admiration for the work you do. But you are also now speaking, and you're an author, and you've got all these other things. So if folks are interested in you coming to speak to their classroom, their corporation, their churches, their junior league, whatever their groups might be, how do people get in touch with you? How can they get you in front of the audiences that they would like to hear your story?
Yeah, they can go to my website, ernestcrim.com. There's a form on there they can fill out. And, I would, that's, what I found is that's a method of teaching outside of the class that I truly love. The first time somebody contacted me to speak, and I was kind of like, well, how do I prepare? What do I do? And I was trying to prepare a lesson plan. And then when I actually got on stage, I was like, yo, this is what I do. Because I would sometimes take time out of my class and go on a tangent about something that happened in my personal life or in the outside world to teach a lesson. And I was like, well, I don't went on a 15-minute tangent before. All I got to do is multiply that by 4 and I'll be fine. 3 or 4. So and I'm good. So I've been doing that for 5 years now. And I love it. I love it because again, it's what I do. I don't have to grade papers after. I don't have to put in attendance. And even beyond that, with my trade as an educator, I can also train because I train educators, I consult people and companies, and that's it's a passion of mine because it's another form of education. So I can be reached on my website again, ernestcrim.com. And for those who are out here listening, your audience, I would love to work with you.
Yeah, well, we need more and more people like you, to be in front of folks who may not have any idea what it's like to walk in your shoes. And while folks like me will never truly know exactly what it feels like, I think hearing and seeing your stories and the stories of others who do have the same or similar lived experience, it at least helps us understand more. I could never claim to, oh yeah, I completely get it because I heard this or I read this, because that's not a reality. But it does give me the opportunity to learn and to share compassion and to share connection, and be better. And that's really the goal, right? Even if it's incremental, we can be better by learning from each other and being more open to the lived experiences and realities of people who are different from us, and honor those differences and celebrate them for what they are, versus weaponizing them to hurt someone else or to defend our bad behavior. That's not okay anymore.
And something that popped up as you were talking was, how we had the conversation about the PBS show. It's, it's difficult to have those conversations, but what, being able to read somebody's story, what that does is it allows you to sit down in a sense and listen to what they had to say, especially if it's an audio book. You get to listen to that. That's one of the reasons why I love autobiography so much. I get to, rest in peace, Sidney Poitier. Like being able to have his book and read it and take it in as if I'm interviewing him. And for some people, you want to ask a question, but sometimes you got to just sit there and listen.
Yeah.
and a book can sometimes simulate that experience for us.
Agreed. Especially if the author reads or narrates the audiobook.
Yeah.
I love that because then you hear their passion, their inflection, their tone, where they really lean into something. And when you read it for yourself, you're still reading it through your lens.
Right.
But when you hear the author read it, you get a whole new dimension to the content. And I think that's really powerful.
Yep.
So I'm so excited, and I want everyone who is watching to go to Ernest's website, order the book. I think you can even order a signed copy.
Yes.
Which I did, by the way. So we want to support you. We want you to be in front of audiences. So anybody out there, if you're building a D&I program or you're wanting to enhance the initiatives within your organizations, please reach out to Ernest and invite him to come and speak with you and learn more about what he can offer, because he has a great story and an amazing delivery of the story to help everybody learn a little bit more. So I want to thank you for being here. Truly enjoyed this conversation. We could probably talk for hours, and maybe I'll be lucky enough to have you come back and we'll do this again when you write your next book. Or your next adventure or what have you. But thank you so very much. I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this, how much I know the folks listening and watching are going to enjoy this. And again, go to ernestcrim.com. That's ERNESTCRIM.com. And you can learn all about Ernest, his story, his book, and how to connect with him to come and help you with your initiatives. Thanks so much, everyone, and have a wonderful rest of your day.